In my last video, I made some V-blocks with one being for my dad. I also mentioned that if you wanted to see me make some clamps for these, to let me know in the comments. With that being said, not one single person asked for it, but it's my show, so we're doing it anyway. Let's build some V-block clamps. This is some 10mm aluminium plate that I found at the scrapyard. It's 140mm wide by 2.1m long. I'll chop off a square and then section it up into 4 even pieces. I'll use the hacksaw to chop it up. Aluminium cuts really easy with the hacksaw and it doesn't take too long at all. For all these pieces it probably took just a little over 5 minutes, and I'm sure it would have taken me longer with the angle grinder if you include setup time. These 4 aluminium blanks are now cut pretty close to size, but I want them to be as clean as possible, so I put them all together in the mill and then ran over them with an end mill on each side. I'll next mark out all my dimensions on one of them, then I thought it'd be fun to try and cut it all out on just the milling machine. So I set it up on some parallels and slowly went around following my scribed lines. It worked out pretty well and carved through it like butter. I was using a 13mm roughing bit for this, but I switched to a 6mm carbide for the rest of the blanks. This is just so I wasn't removing so much material. I've read that it's recommended to use 2 flute end mills for aluminium, but mine hadn't arrived yet. Although I can confirm that in this case the 4 flutes worked perfectly. I was only taking about 1 to 2mm depths of cut throughout the whole process, and it was cutting really well. I just didn't want to push the mill too hard. The parts did not fit up straight away, so after this first cut was done I then refined the lines and took a pass at full depth down to my new lines. This pass made the clamps fit perfectly. Next step, I lined up all 4 and made a mark with a centre drill bit. I then moved the table over 10mm and repeated for the rest of them. After that I did the same but drilled all the way through with a 4mm drill bit. Now it's time to tap the M5 holes, and the mill does come with a tapping mode, however I haven't had much of a chance to practice with it, so I'll just tap these out by hand. Tapping by hand really isn't as hard as what a lot of people make it seem, especially in aluminium, but the same rules apply. Line it up nice and square in both directions, a little bit of pressure, plenty of oil, and make sure you back off the tap regularly to break the chips. They're looking pretty good, but it isn't over yet. I'll next go over to the sander and break the corners down with a nice chamfer. Finally, I can take a couple of light passes with the fly cutter that I made in a previous video, and this makes them look amazing. The aluminium parts of this clamp are all done, so now I can move on to the screw mechanism. They say if you want to make a project somewhat interesting, just add brass, so let's do that. I've got 2 different sizes here. One is about 25mm in diameter and the other is about 10mm. The 25mm one is up first, so I'll chuck it up in the lathe and then do a quick drill on the end. This is for the live center, and in this case I don't care about having a hole there because it's going to be drilled through anyway. With the live center in, I'll then take a very light skim pass across the bar just to clean it up a little. As this bar is used to make the thumb screws, I went out and bought a knurling tool. I applied some pressure on the brass and then sent it on its way. The knurls turned out great, so I took the bar out and chopped it down, just leaving a little bit of extra material to hold onto the jaws. I can then drill a 5mm hole just about all the way through. I thought I could separate them with a parting off blade, and it started off not too bad, but it didn't really like it all that much. So I marked out all the knobs at once by making a small groove, and then I chopped them down with the hacksaw. To clean them up, I place them back on the lathe, but using a 10mm parallel to space them off the back. Then, taking a couple of facing passes, they are all nice and smooth. With them all cleaned up, I place them onto a bolt and then into the lathe to put little chamfers on the edges, just so they are nicer in the hand. Finally, I can drill them out of a countersink just for the stainless steel bolt. With a nut on that and the rest of them all done, I can now move over to the 10mm brass. These are for the little knobs on the end so it doesn't mark up anything that you put in the V-block. Like before, I'll drill a hole for the live center and take a skim pass. Then I'll mark out the length with a pointy lathe tool and take a couple of facing passes, before drilling a 4mm hole in the end that only goes about 15mm deep. An M5 tap is placed in the chuck and just hand fed into the part. When it bottoms out, I can take it out and cut it off with a hacksaw using the mark I made with a pointy tool. After I took a facing cut to clean up the end, it's all done. And once they are assembled, all the V-block clamps are complete. I made both the V-blocks and these clamps for my dad, and he's blown away by how well they turned out. I tested them with some leftover brass, and even with just a little bit of force on the screw, I cannot get the part to move. With the brass knob on the bottom, it does limit the height a little, but you can remove it to fit bigger sizes. This works just as well, as long as you don't mind little marks on the rod. All that's left is to put the V-blocks and clamps on Dad's workbench. Hopefully they are just what he is after. Thanks for watching this video, and bye for now.